Hi, this is Simon Obstill and welcome to part 3 of this very gentle introduction to Blender in which we're looking at building this scene. So this is where we left it last time around, and what we're going to be doing in this part is we're going to be animating the individual components. We're going to be adding a camera move. We're going to be doing a little bit of work on the environment lighting. And finally, we'll do a little bit of compositing to finish it off. So the first thing I want to do is I want to come out of this render display mode and back into the material preview view. Just makes everything a little bit easier. Let's come over to the outliner and make sure we've got our sphere selected. Let's just bring this up a bit. And then I'm going to come to Object Properties. And what we're going to do is, first of all, just create a gentle rotation on this sphere. So I want you to notice that at the bottom of this workspace, this is the layout workspace, you've got these playback controls, and we can jump to the start point or end point, and we can jump between keyframes, and obviously these play backwards and forwards. The other thing I want you to notice is that Blender starts from frame 1, unlike certain other applications that use frame 0 as the starting point. So here we are at frame 1, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit a keyframe for the Z rotation. So this tiny little dot there to the right, click on that, and you see we get this diamond that indicates we've set a keyframe there. Then I'm going to come forward to the end frame, so jump to end point there, and I'm going to type in 360 for the Z, and I'm going to hit the keyframe button. And the reason I have to set it manually is that Blender doesn't by default have auto keyframing. So now you'll notice that the sphere is rotating around gently like that. What you won't notice is that it's actually easing in and out, and we don't want that. We just want a continuous linear movement. So we need to come to the graph editor for that. And to come to the graph editor, what I'm going to do is down here, you'll see that I've got on this dividing line these arrows that point up and down. And if I right click with that selected, I can choose horizontal split. And then if I move upwards, you can see we've got this sort of splitter, and I'm going to split it about here. So now we've got at the bottom our playback pane. Then we've got a duplicate of our 3D viewport, and then at the top our actual 3D viewport. So what I'm going to do is come down to here, and this menu here allows us to set this pane to any of these different editors. And what I want for this particular editor is the graph editor, because we want to be able to see the keyframes in action. So select that, and you can see we've got a graph view here. So any one of these panes can be zoomed up to full frame, and it's often a pretty good idea to do that if you're working with the graph editor. So to zoom up to full frame, we can use Control Spacebar, and you can see we're now at full frame. Unfortunately, we haven't got our keyframes when we do that, and that's because we need to reselect our sphere. So let's reselect the sphere, and let's again do Control Spacebar. And let's drag both of these zoom controls to get the full view of the graph. Now, I want you to notice that over here on the right, we've got a panel for the F-curve, where for any selected point, we can very precisely adjust its parameters. But we're not going to be using that here. All we want is a linear curve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this first keyframe here down at the bottom. Now I want you to notice that you can't actually select a keyframe by drawing over it. You can draw over it to manipulate it like this, but you can't select it in order to do what we need to be able to do. And to do that, we need to click on it. And you can see that brings up this menu here. I'm labouring this point because this graph editor can be confusing when you first start using it. So I've got this one selected here. I'm going to hit T on the keyboard, and I'm going to select linear like that, and it creates a nice linear interpolation. So let's come out of full frame view, so that's Control Spacebar again, and let's hide the sphere because now we want to animate the other components. So I'm going to select the rotor. In actual fact, I'm just going to reduce the height of this because, as you know, we can just zoom up, so we don't actually need it other than to be able to access it like that. So I'm going to select the rotor, And again, let's come to the first frame and let's do the same thing with setting keyframes. So keyframe the Z there at 0, come to the last frame, and I want this to go backwards. So I'm going to go for negative 1440 on that and hit a keyframe. So now if we scrub along, you can see that's rotating backwards. And we need to do the same thing. So hover over the graph editor, control spacebar. So we need to select our rotation. So we can do that from here now. Select the rotation there. Let's normalize it. And then let's click on this. T to bring up the interpolation and choose linear. And then control spacebar to come back out again. So let's do the same thing with this top rotor. And you remember that the top rotor is actually connected to the bottom one. So if we animate the Z like that, you can see they're connected, or parented, I should say. So again, let's come to the start. Again, let's set a Z rotation keyframe. Again, let's come to the end. And for this, let's have, I don't know, positive 1440. And hit a keyframe again. And again, let's hover over the graph editor. I'm doing this repetitive action so you really get this into your head. So control spacebar. Let's select this one by clicking on it. T to bring up the menu. Linear to make it linear. And control spacebar to come out of it. And then let's select this top rotor here, which again is parented to the bottom one, if you remember. Come to the first frame. Set a Z keyframe. Come to the last frame, and can't remember what we did. Let's actually make this faster. Let's go for 2160 for this and hit a keyframe. So now that's going around in the same direction. Actually, I want it to go around the opposite direction. So come to the last frame and let's set this to negative 2160. And again, we just need to double click that to make sure we've actually set the keyframe that we want. Control T to bring up the graph editor, select the first keyframe, T to bring up this menu, the interpolation menu, and select linear, and control spacebar to come out of it. So that's all fairly simple, and we've now got this kind of contrary rotation of all the elements that's going to look quite nice. The next thing I want to do is animate the lights. So over here in the outliner, I'm going to right click, make a new collection, and I'm going to take my two lights and I'm going to bring it into this collection, and I'll just name that collection lights. What I actually want to do with these lights is that I want to link them to an empty and then animate the empty, and it'll be clear why in a second. So let's now come to add, and let's add another empty. Let's use arrows this time just to be different. You can see it kind of gives us an X, Y, Z like that. So there's our new empty. Let's, for safety, call it empty lights so we don't confuse it with anything else. And I'll show you a different way now of parenting these lights to that empty. So select both of those, Shift or Control click them, and then holding down the Shift key, let's drag them onto the empty. And now, if I rotate the empty, you can probably see that the lights are going around. Let's maybe come to this view here, and you can see that the lights are rotating with the empty. So what I'm going to do is I want the lights to kind of oscillate up and down as well as go around. Let's come to the first frame and let's set the Z location to negative 0.45 and hit a keyframe. Then I want to come forward to, I don't know, say frame 51. Let's try that. So here you can set the current frame. So this one here, let's set that to 51, which is kind of roughly 2 seconds down the timeline. And let's set this Z value to positive 0.45 and hit a keyframe. And then let's come to frame 101. As I say, Blender uses 1 as the starting point. That's why we're using 101 and 51. And let's set this Z value down to 0.45 again, and again hit a keyframe. So we don't want to go through and have to manually set this loop. So what we're going to do is again come into the graph editor, so Control Spacebar. And we have actually got our last point selected, but if we haven't, then we need to click on it to select it. And over here on the right, we've got that F-curve menu that we've noticed before, we've also got a modifiers menu. And this is very useful because we can now add modifier and we can select cycles. And you can immediately see that we've now got that looping indefinitely. And we can come out of the keyframe editor by hitting Control Spacebar. So now you can see that hopefully the lights are going up and down like that. So we also want them to go around. So let's come to the first frame and let's again use the Z rotation. So hit a keyframe there, come to the last frame. Let's maybe go for 960 for this value and hit a keyframe. And again, we need to come into the graph editor. Now we've got two sets of keyframes for the same object here. So let's open up this menu here. The location we've already done, so let's hide that by clicking on its eye there. So now we're just left with the Z rotation. And again, click on the first keyframe there, T to bring up our interpolation menu, and let's select linear. And we're done. And we can turn the sphere back on again, and we've animated all the elements that we need to animate. Finally though, let's animate the camera. And I think I'll just put the camera into a new collection. So right click and call this camera, and then take the camera and just drag it into the collection like that. So what I'm going to do with the camera is, again, I'm going to use an empty to drive it. So let's actually just again come out of this rendered preview and select the material view like that. And let's come to add and empty, and let's use, I don't know, the arrows again. We liked those, didn't we? There's our new empty, and let's call it empty camera. And then as before, let's parent the camera to the empty by selecting it, hold down the shift key and drag it over the empty. And now we can rotate the camera using the empty. So let's have a look at the scene through the camera view. So we can do that by coming to view and viewpoint and camera, but you can also do it by hitting 0 on the number pad. So here is our camera view. I'm just going to zoom out. What I'm going to do with the empty for the camera is I'm going to animate its X rotation. Let's maybe choose -20 for the start rotation, keyframe it, come to the end, and I'm going to set this to something like 60, keyframe it again, and then Control Spacebar over the graph editor, select the first keyframe there, T for the interpolation menu, and linear. So if, like me, you think it's a real pain to have to switch the keyframes to linear every single time, you don't actually have to do that. You can come to Edit and Preferences and Animation, this one here, and for the default interpolation, select linear instead of Bezier, and then that linear will always be the default. So just a quick tip, you might want to set it up like that. And now we're done with animating, and we've got this pretty nice camera move. So we're looking down slightly and then we're looking up into the body of it. So let's come to a render image and do a quick render of this frame. So it's looking pretty boring, and that's because our environment is in fact this dull grey colour, and you can see that these metallic panels, which ought to be shiny, just look dull and grey because that's all they're in fact reflecting. So let's sort that out. But first of all, let's lose the graph editor. So if I hover over here and I choose join areas and use the down arrow like that, our graph editor panel completely disappears. So as I say, we want to pay attention to the environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to come to the world properties. You can see it here. Let's click on that, and you can see that our world surface is background, and there is the color. So what we're going to do is click on here. So that's the dot next to color, and we're going to choose environment texture instead. And then what I'm going to do is click on open here, and I'm going to navigate to my HDRI image, which is going to give us HDRI illumination. So open this up. Here's my HDRI image, which I'll give you a link to. Click Open Image. Leave all these at the defaults, but you notice that we can actually adjust the strength there if we actually wanted to. So now if we render, it's actually looking a whole lot more interesting. But you'll notice now we've got these windows because of our HDRI image, and I don't want that. I actually want to be compositing against black. So let's look at how we're going to do that. So let's come up here to Render Properties, click on that, and scroll down until we get to Film. Open that up. Don't ask me why this is under Film, doesn't seem to make much sense, but anyway, let's click on Transparent. And if I render again, you'll see we've got the checkerboard in the background, and that indicates that we've now got an alpha channel there. So now that we've got that alpha channel, we can composite it onto a background of our choosing. So to do that, we are actually going to come to the Compositing workspace. So let's click on that, and it all looks a little bit confusing. Can't see anything at all. And that's because the first thing we need to do is click on Use Nodes to enable the compositing tree. And then if we just have a look at what we've got our scene image, and then we've got the composite output. Now, because I've got two screens, I can actually see the rendered output on my other screen. But because we're just using one screen for this tutorial, we can't actually see what's going on. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come to Add and Output and select Viewer like that. And then I'm going to take this image and pipe it into the image input of the viewer. And now you'll see that we can see our render in the background there. So to give ourselves a bit more space, I'm going to hit Control Spacebar on the compositing window. And that's a bit better. And I'm just going to scroll to make this a bit smaller so we can see our viewer a bit better. So the first thing I want to do is I want to composite this over black. So I'm going to come to Add and Input and Constant and RGB. And this just creates a straight RGB solid. So it's this kind of grey, but let's actually make it black by just dragging that down. So in order to get our render over black, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Shift A, which brings up the search. Click on Search. And what I want to search for is alpha over. So that one there, like this. And then I'm going to just drop it into here. If I just drop it over that pipe, you'll see it actually connects. And what we need to do is to take our image output and pipe it into the bottom slot, because bizarrely what's in the bottom slot is in fact the top layer. And then we can take our RGB color and pipe it into the top slot, which is the background layer. So now we're compositing over this black solid, and if I change the color, you can see that updates. And there's one other thing I want to do while we're in this compositor, and that's to add a nice soft glow. So to do that, I'm going to hit Shift A again to bring up the search, click on Search, and let's type glare. And then let's just drop it in after the alpha over. As I say, if you drop it over the pipe, it makes that connection for you. And you can see we've got these streaks, and you might actually quite like those streaks. They're quite nice. But actually what we're going to do is we're going to select fog glow instead, and we just get this nice soft glow. And that's pretty good just as it is. So for the purposes of our output, obviously we are not outputting to the viewer, we are outputting to the composite. So we need to take our glare and add it to the image input of the composite, and then our rendered output is going to look like this viewer output. So we're done with the compositor. I'm going to do Control Spacebar to come out of it, and I just want to do a little bit of adjustment of the shading. So let's come back over to the layout workspace, and I'm going to select my sphere. I'm also going to come into the rendered preview here and get a better idea of what it's looking like. I'm going to come down to the materials, and I want to select body, and let's just reduce this roughness down to 0.025. And now we've removed most of that frostiness, and we've got a much glassier look overall, and that's going to give us more production value, I think. And let's also do the same thing with the panels. So select the panels, and we gave it a roughness of 0.2. Let's maybe make that 0.1. And so those panels are more reflective. You can see they're starting to pick up that lighting off the HDRI image, so those windows in the background. So now if we render, we've composited over black, we've got that nice glow, we've got our HDR lighting, which is making everything look nice and shiny, and it's all looking pretty good. So there you go. I think we have actually reached the end of this tutorial, and the only thing really to talk about is how you would actually output this. So down here, we've got the output properties, and this allows us to configure our rendered output. So you need to decide on your file format whether you want to output an image sequence or a movie. The easiest way to do an image sequence is PNG, but the best way is OpenEXR, but that will come with extra complications. So let's assume we're just using PNG though, and let's click on here and then just navigate to wherever you want this output to go. And that'll create a sequence of images that you can composite in some other application like After Effects or Motion or Premiere or whatever you prefer or have to hand. But if you don't want to do that, what I would suggest is maybe using FFmpeg video like so, and then you can choose your encoding here, and you might want to choose MPEG-4 or something like that, or any of these options depending on what system you're using. MPEG-4 is probably pretty good, and you can set the quality here. And again, you just need to make sure that you've set up your output path. And then when you're happy with that, you can come to Render, Render Animation, and it'll render out your scene. So there you go. I think we've completed this beginner's Blender course, and I hope it's taught you quite a lot of useful core techniques. So thanks very much indeed for watching. See you again soon.